They had expected some casualties. Their 2 hospital ships could handle 500 seriously injured men. However, 5,000 soldiers had been killed or wounded. Today, there are no living survivors from the Gallipoli campaign. But 90 years on, sons, daughters, and relatives return to the peninsula with the Gallipoli Association. May is retreading the ground where his father fought in the days immediately after the landing.
But when you think that this was the area where there were trenches all the way along, and this was the front line, you know, it really, my imagination runs away with me. Must have been bloody awful.
For days after the landing, the troops were pinned down. They had barely advanced.
Bodies everywhere, which must have been dreadful, and the flies and everything else. Yeah, this is border reveal. I'm sure this is border reveal.
Lieutenant John Reed described the dead in his diary.
They're a revolting sight, as they've been out in the searing heat for 5 days.
You know, 100 killed, and that sort of thing. And to say only 60 casualties, not all of them killed, but only 60 casualties, I mean, it was horrifying. It was a different generation to our generation.
Rafe May's father served with the 1st Border Regiment at Gallipoli. By the end of the campaign, every one of his fellow officers in Willoughby has a special interest in this place. It's called Dead Man's Ridge. It was here that his grandfather's brother, a teenage boy, came under enemy fire in the first few weeks of the campaign.
And struggling up this sort of terrain.
Yeah.
And you can imagine this poor lad at 15, and sort of, you just try and put yourself, proved to be the youngest killed in action. The simple fact that you had people of that age, in a way, willing to, of their own free will, to enlist and go and serve in the army of their country, and then pay the ultimate price at such a tender age, still comes as a bit of a...
Oil bottle from a Lee Enfield rifle unscrews. There's a little spoon inside where they could put the oil in. This has been struck by a shrapnel ball and still embedded in it. And this I find interesting as well. I've seen these in France on the Western Front. These are the original metal strippings used on the wooden crosses.
They never fought it out to the finish. They never gave my schemes a fair trial.
By June, the Allies were getting nowhere. But the army, which had now grown in size, still needed to be supplied, and everything had to come by sea. The beaches had become vast military complexes. Supplies and ammunition were landed at piers before being taken up to the front line.
Though it was a rear area, it was never true, more importantly the Turk artillery, firing onto the beaches, which from their own maps they knew precisely where they were, and were continually laying down shell fire. The only way to avoid casualties
Dominated by the Turks. The Anzacs were pinned down in a confined space, and there was no room to land reinforcements. So General Hamilton decided to open a new front. His plan was to land troops at Suvla Bay, 5-mile Turkish defences, cutting them off, and link up with the besieged Anzac units to assist their breakout. A huge force of fresh troops for the new landings were allocated to the task. Twice as many as Hamilton had been able. Beetles were armoured boats that could carry 500 men. They could deliver troops directly onto the beach using a ramp which could be lowered over the bows.
Offensives had failed, and that brought an end to any credibility that the Gallipoli campaign still had in London. Hamilton was sent home, and his replacement, Sir Charles Monro, came, which was that it had failed and they should evacuate.
Churchill, who had held on to his place on the government's Dardanelles committee, was outraged by Monro's decision.
He kept ground there, played cricket, shells interrupted it, But it gave the Turks the impression that we were still here, that things were normal, but again, in reality, this was deceiving them, and we were slowly withdrawing from the positions here at Gallipoli.
In charge of the fortifications in France, no beaches had ever been more heavily defended. So how could the Allies avoid disaster this time?
The preparations for D-Day were some of the most complicated and comprehensive for any military operation in history. There was a deception plan known as Operation Fortitude, the idea being to persuade the Germans that the major attack would come not in Normandy.
Gallipoli in 1915. They're looking beyond the beaches. It's not just about fighting on beaches, it's moving inland, and they're looking at objectives beyond those beaches to move in and the landing area.
I've never seen so many ships in an area of water, as you can see right round here, right from horizon to horizon, nothing but ships. It was difficult to see, full of smoke and dust, and there were rounds being fired, and you didn't know quite well.
The Omaha, as they later named it. Here, things were going far less smoothly.
I got 12 more men. I gotta get up there. I gotta get up underneath the bluffs as close as I can.
The Americans faced crack German troops. The steep bluffs only added to their difficulties.
One severe handicap for the Americans was the lack of any of the funnies, the British specialised armour used for breaking their way through the beach obstacles.
The only funny...
Those boys were dropped off too far out, and they had to swim in. A lot of them drowned. Look at all the equipment they had.
2,000 American soldiers died on Omaha Beach that day. More than on all the other 4 beaches put together.
But we should never forget that despite everything, the Americans
knew the pressure on the French to crush them. But where and how? It's the answer to that question that makes the saga of Verdun